All right, heroes, we are live on YouTube. Thank you for waiting. Just connecting some tubes. YouTube is a system of tubes that we have to connect in order to see each other. So, really glad to have you here. Today's topic. Hold on, got a little feedback there. Today's topic is kind of a serious one. It's kind of hard for some people to talk about, but it's serious because it's important and it affects people's lives, and it affects whole populations of people's lives. And so I didn't want to shy away from it, especially right now. If anything, I think I'm coming a little bit late to the party in terms of giving you information that you might need or want to make decisions and how you think about things. But nevertheless, wanted to get this done before Shabbat. So today we are talking about abortion in Jewish law and how abortion has been perceived in Jewish thought. And I'll say, if you're looking for a quick, simple answer on this one, I have to disappoint you right now. You might want to watch another video. This is not going to be 90 seconds. This may be 90 minutes. Hopefully not that long. Probably like 30, 45 minutes or so. We're going to talk about this. But here we really like to settle in and discuss a particular issue. So that's what we're here for. This is also a live studio recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. And I call it a live studio recording because I'm on YouTube Live doing it, and we've got people who have come in and joined the chat, and so they're giving me shout outs, telling me where they're coming from, and asking me questions along the way as we talk about this thing. This isn't just a monologue. I'm going to talk for a little while just to share with you some information that I think is important for you to have, and then open it up to a Q&A so that we can really have a discussion. That's why I like to do these shows live. No, not as many sound effects, not as maybe polished as other podcasts, but that's okay. I'm here to help Jew Curious people not win cinematography awards, as it were. So thank you for joining me today. In just a second, I'm going to introduce the podcast in my radio announcery voice, and that sounds a little bit like this. Hero, have you been watching the news about different laws being passed in different states regarding abortion and wondered, what does Judaism say about abortion, its legality, its ethics, and things like this? And I always hate to start an answer with Judaism says, ... because Judaism says a lot of things, and the answer is almost always it's complicated, because Jews have been talking about the most critical issues in people's lives for about 4,000 years now. And so we've said a lot of things, and we've had scholars and teachers and leaders and lay people share various opinions. Sometimes people agree with each other. Most of the time, there's not perfect agreement. So Judaism says a lot of things about the topic of abortion and women's health and women's right to determine their own health and the responsibilities of doctors and things like that. And so what I wanted to do today, in the context of the national debate that's going on right now, give you some information on sort of the mainstream thought in the Jewish tradition, in Jewish law, so that you can dig a little bit deeper, so that you can be informed. But I also want to do this because I think there's something else critical that's going on, and that is a threat to the free exercise of religion of Jewish people in the United States of America. And we'll get to that in just a bit. But first, the bass. That's me taking a little silence print so I can edit the audio a little bit later. And now we're going to get back into the show. Thank you, Ron Snow, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg, for always having inspirational opening beats for this show. I want to really thank the people who have showed up live here today. We've made a minion and then some in the chat here on YouTube Live. And most of all, I want to thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. This is a live studio recording, meaning I'm on live right now on YouTube. Not, while you're listening to it, because this is a recording. But I'm on YouTube Live right now, and people are there in the chat saying hello, giving shout-outs, high-fiving each other, and asking some good questions about various Jewish topics. That's why I like to do this live, so that I can answer their questions, because chances are other people have those questions too, and we all get to do some learning together. Today's topic, I'll say, can be a controversial one. People have very strong feelings about it, from moral conviction, from religious conviction, from personal experience. 1 in 4 women, I'm told, have had an abortion in the United States. And so people are going to have strong feelings about this. Nevertheless, I didn't want that to be an excuse to shy away from a topic that is front and center in the national debate right now. And my goal today is my goal today is to share with you some information on the evolution of Jewish thinking over the course of, let's say, millennia, on abortion, on what it is, on what the consequences are, legally, morally, spiritually, what is permissible, what is discouraged, what is necessary sometimes. And so I want you to have that information for your own knowledge, for your own future study, if you want to take this a little bit further. But I also want to touch on, before we conclude, how this debate is affecting the free exercise of religion of Jewish people in the United States of America. And I wanted you to be fully informed on that as well. Before we get into it, I want to give some shout outs to the people who have joined me live. We have Karen is here from Philly. Nice to see you, Karen. Susan from Florida says Shabbat Shalom, just about. That's almost true for me here in California. I'm recording this on a Friday, by the way. Drake says hello from Huntsville, Alabama. Nice to see you, Drake. Every time I see Drake, I think a space camp, because that's my only interface with Huntsville, Alabama. And yes, I am a huge nerd, or at least I was when I was 10 years old. No, I'm still a nerd. Good to see Robert Lee from Toronto. Zach Russell is here. Autumn is here from Arizona. Nice to see you. Welcome, Val from Florida. Good to have you here. Got a lot of Floridians watch this. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm someplace sunny and they're someplace sunny, so we tend to think alike. Nicola B. says, hello, Rabbi, coming from California. Welcome. Grycicle says, shalom. Budrod, too, from Georgia, says, hello, all. And Vanessa is here from Germany saying hi. Hi, Vanessa. Glad to have you here. So without further ado, without mincing any words, without any kind of housekeeping or promos or anything like that, I want to get right into it. I'll do some promos later. Don't worry about that. But right now, I want to get into this topic of the view of abortion in Jewish law for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of the legislation, it is my impression from the people who are enacting it, are coming from a place of religious conviction. They're coming from a place of citing scripture and things like that. They're enacting these laws based on religious conviction. And I just want to point out, Jews have some religious convictions on this as well. Sometimes our convictions agree, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people who are, how do I put this? Sometimes people who are strong advocates for, advocates for restricting access to certain aspects of women's health care are quoting something from the Torah. For them, it's called the Old Testament. I just call it the Testament myself, or the Torah. And I have that same verse in my Torah, and it is read very differently. And I wanted to clarify that difference. And I want to clarify how the read of that verse and the understanding of human anatomy, the understanding of rights of living people versus potential people, have been discussed for literally thousands of years in Jewish texts and Jewish law. And so that's what I wanted to come to this today. A little bit. That's why live video and radio is so much fun. Hold on. So let's get into it. One text that is often cited when it comes to permitting or not permitting abortions to take place is from Sefer Shemot. It's from the book of Exodus. It says, let's see, we're on chapter 21, verse 22. It says, when two men are fighting and one of those men accidentally strikes a pregnant woman. You know, it's kind of a mob thing going on. There are a lot of people involved. Maybe the woman is pulling somebody off of her brother or husband or something like that, or just trying to break up the fight. And then this woman who's in the mix somehow is struck, and she's pregnant, and the blow causes her to, God forbid, miscarry. Then it says the man who struck her is liable for damages. It says, you know, if it also says, let me clarify a little bit. It says if she miscarries, but there is no further damage other than the miscarriage, the person is liable for damages. If there is further consequence besides the miscarriage, then the man is held, let's say, capitally responsible. I mean, he is subject to the death penalty potentially. And so some traditions read this text and say a man has struck a woman, you know, using, you know, some sort of physical intervention on this woman, and she has miscarried, and sort of skip over part of the verse and then get to the thing, you know, he is liable for, skip over part of the verse and say he is liable for capital punishment, right? Which is reserved for many things in the Torah, including murder. And so some traditions read this verse and say, if a person strikes a pregnant woman and causes a fetus to abort, then he is a murderer who has done this. And there's a great thread. There's a lot of great threads. If you're not following Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg on Twitter, then you're probably not on Twitter. If you are on Twitter, you should definitely be following Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, because she points out with great energy that this interpretation is a complete misread of biblical Hebrew. Right? It makes it very clear in the biblical Hebrew that the person is liable for damages in the case where, we'll hate to say this, merely a miscarriage occurs. But the circumstance where it sort of elevates it to a capital crime is understood as if the woman is killed, right? If he strikes the woman, she miscarries, it's damages. It's not considered a capital crime. It's a crime, right? It's in the sense of he hit her, you know, not with the intention of conducting a medical procedure, but there's a fight going on and somebody gets hurt, and it's not her choice to terminate this pregnancy. Then this person's on the hook. This person needs to make restitution. But short of taking the living mother's life, this is not considered taking a life. And the rabbis expand upon this over the centuries in places like the Mishnah and the Talmud and the law codes, and even modern rabbinic, even modern rabbinic legal writing up into the late 20th, early 21st century. In Jewish legal reasoning, life does not begin at conception. Life does not begin at 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 30 weeks, 28 weeks is sometimes a benchmark because some physicians say that's when a fetus is potentially viable outside the womb. Life begins in Jewish law at birth. It discusses it in the Talmud in Yevamot, let's see, 69b. It says that before 40 days after conception, the fetus is considered kamayim. It's like water. It's merely water. There's sort of no organization or substance to it. And you can look at a microscope. You can come up with a different scientific opinion. But according to the reasoning of the Talmud, the fetus has no greater status than water inside of a person's body. Beyond that point, beyond this sort of corresponds roughly with what obstetricians call the quickening, when it starts to become something and taking form, the fetus is considered a fetus. It's considered a potential child. It's under the best of circumstances, to be loved and hoped for and nurtured so that there's a good birth if that's what's desired. But it's not a living being with all the rights and responsibilities and privileges thereof. It clarifies this in the Mishnah in Ochalot, I think it's chapter 7, Mishnah 6, where it says that a fetus is not a person, or rather a person doesn't become a person, meaning a living person with all the rights of a living person, until birth. Sort of between that like water phase and a head coming out of the birth canal, the fetus is considered like the limb of the mother. And this is important from a technical, legal point of view and a medical point of view. Imagine, God forbid, somebody is in a situation where an amputation is required to save their life, right? Somebody has, I've had relatives with advanced diabetes, or somebody has like nephritis, or I'm not saying medical words, right? Somebody has some condition where they need to amputate a limb to save their life. You amputate the limb. I mean, even though we have strong feelings about violating the human body in extraordinary ways, if it means saving a person's life, you're allowed to deform them. You're allowed to remove a limb in order to save a life. And a fetus, prior to the moment of birth, is considered the same kind of thing. It is like the mother's thigh or limb, or however you want to interpret that word. Like ubar, I think is the word for it. So in Jewish law, life doesn't begin at conception. Life doesn't begin at 12 weeks or 28 weeks, or even at the very last second before the child emerges into breathing air. Right, into the air, not breathing air necessarily, because you got to clear that stuff out. And I've been in a couple of childbirths, but a person is not a person until their skin is exposed to air outside of the mother of their body. And to be really technical, this is sort of defined as the emergence of the head from the womb, or in the unfortunate case of a breech birth, the majority of the child's body. Right. If the head's coming out last, if the majority of the child's body is out, then it is a person. Or in sort of the normal course of things, if the head is out, it's considered a person. And at that point, you are not allowed to take its life in order to save the life of the mother. Because we've been talking about this a little bit with Parshat Emor and Pikuach Nefesh, and the idea that you don't take a life in order to save a life. Unless it's the case of somebody who is chasing you to kill you, a rodef or a pursuer or an assassin. And that's even mentioned in the halachic literature on abortion. Maimonides discusses this case where if there is a fetus that is that has the potential of killing the mother, and not just, because every fetus has that potential, but if there is a fetus where it's clear that there is a real and present risk of killing the mother, the fetus in some texts is considered as a rodef, right? It's like a person who is coming to kill you. And it's not exactly a person even, but it's like a person. It's like that circumstance. So even recognizing that this is we even recognize this is a living thing. Like a fetus is a separate living entity, but it's not a person with the right to have its life protected if that life itself is going to kill the mother, severely injure the mother. And here's where we get into variations in rabbinic opinion. There are those who say that an abortion can only happen if if the fetus poses a mortal danger to the mother. If it's life or death, then it's permissible, and some would say it is required. There are those who say, yes, if it's life or death, or could cause significant trauma, right? Not life or death, but trauma, injury, illness, pain, even like extreme pain. And there's pain at most births. I understand that, but even if the birth of this child is going to seriously harm, short of death, then too, abortion is permitted. And there are those who would extend this, not, beyond death, beyond health, to another category of health, and that is mental health. And not all rabbis agree on this, but there are some who say that if the birth of this child is going to cause irreparable damage to someone's mental health, then that could be a case where abortion is permitted. And the punchline or the through line of all this stuff that I want to make sure is clear, that in Jewish law, abortion is never desired. It's never sought after or promoted. It's never been something that we've taken lightly. In just about every text on the subject, it's saying if you can avoid it, if it's at all possible to avoid it, avoid it. However, there are no Jewish legal authorities, and I hate using always and never, but I've been looking, and there is no Jewish legal authority, even the strictest ones that I've taken a look at, some Haredi, or some people say ultra-Orthodox folks writing about this topic in the late 20th century. Even the most restrictive rulings on this won't say that abortion is never okay, right? We can't have a blanket prohibition. Even the most strict read says that we take this, we discourage it. It's not a nice thing. It's not a pleasant thing. I don't think any woman going for an abortion thinks about it like it's a pleasant thing. That's an experience to be gone through out of necessity, but nobody's doing it because they want to necessarily. But even the most restrictive person says that it is impossible for us to outlaw this in all circumstances. And there are things that we do outlaw in all circumstances. That's another discussion we were having about Parashat Emor this week. In Pikuach Nefesh, you can abrogate any Jewish law in the books if you're saving the life of another person to do so, except for idolatry, sexual violence, or murder. Right? You are not allowed to, let's say, God forbid, somebody comes up to you and says, I'm going to kill you unless you kill him. In that circumstance, we are told that we should rather forfeit our life than than to kill another person to save our own life, right? Than to commit murder to save our own life. So that being said, if we've got a clear precedent that we are not allowed to murder in order to save a life, or even save another person's life. We're not allowed to commit murder to save another person's life. If somebody's an aggressor, that's different. But we're not allowed to murder someone in order to save a life. And yet, throughout the ages, all discussions of abortion have refused to take that hard stance that it's never okay. Then Judaism, from my understanding, from my studies and talking to people on this, has never considered abortion to be murder. That is where there's a divergence from even the most strict, punctilious, I'll even say fundamentalist points of view in Judaism do not agree with some very, I'll say, mainstream opinions in Christianity about this. And so I wanted to make that case clear. So how Jewish law views abortion is, it's never a good thing, right? It's never a thing where we would encourage somebody, want somebody to do it, or would want for ourselves to do this. But it's not forbidden because there may be a particular circumstance in which it's required to save somebody's life, in which it's required to save somebody's physical well-being, in which case it is required to save someone's mental well-being. And there was a particular case in a tshuva that I was reading where they're talking about the circumstance where a couple or a mother had multiple children who had really drastic illnesses, and the woman became pregnant again, and was faced with the likelihood, in fact verified by tests, that she would have another child that would have the same illness. And the question was whether she was permitted, even though she would be probably fine mortally, right? She wouldn't die, but to endure that hardship, to endure that pain, seemed unreasonable in this circumstance. And I would extend this, just to get back to the present laws under discussion, I would extend this to circumstances of pregnancy by violence, pregnancy by rape or incest, which is redundant because it's akin to rape, at least in Jewish law, and I think it just makes sense to me. So in the case of a pregnancy that was initiated against the will of the mother, that the mother should be forced to take this child to term, should be forced to have this child, possibly raise this child. I have a pretty active imagination, but I can't think of a lot of things that would be inflict more suffering on a person. And so I think that fits into the category of some Jewish views of the permissibility of an abortion. So I wanted to lay that out for you just so you can have the Jewish view. I'm not trying to change anybody's minds out there. I'm not going to tell you if you're a part of another religion and you believe another way. You do you as far as what you believe and what you do for yourself. But what you believe and the kinds of decisions you make for your own body is different from what you force other people to do with their bodies. And that's where I wanted to get into a very important thing that I want to maybe conclude this lecture part with. And that is the way the statute is written. At least I haven't read the whole thing, but at least in summary and how it's purported in the news. The way the statute is set up in Alabama is that it is more restrictive of abortion than Jewish law on abortion. And why does this make a difference? People don't go around asking the Jews like, hey, what do you think we should make laws about? Although it's interesting how many laws are made based on the Torah, things like that. Bankruptcy is 7 years, murder's a bad idea, things like that. But, why does it matter if they didn't ask us before they enacted this law? Well, why it matters is that a Jewish woman in Alabama making decisions about her own health care, about her own family, about her own body, and making those decisions according to Jewish faith, Jewish practice, Jewish belief, consultation perhaps with other members of her family, possibly consultations with her rabbi, but most importantly, consultations with her own conscience, need, reason, cannot act on her religious conviction under Alabama law. A Jewish doctor in Alabama can't act in the best interest of the mother, can't act in his duties as a physician, much less his religious conviction as a Jew. And this is the state passing a law that inhibits the free exercise of one faith in that state, and I'll say at least in connotation, because of the interests of another faith in that state, although that's not really important here. And so this law, in my view, is not only, so I'll say the least impactful thing here is it's not only in consonant with Jewish tradition, debating this over the course of thousands of years. It is also not respecting the rights of women to determine their health care. Further, it is putting the state of Alabama in the position of abridging the free exercise of religion of its Jewish citizens, whether those citizens are people giving birth or healthcare providers. And so on that basis, I mean, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but it seems like it's going to be suspect. But what I will not do is stand idly by the blood of a neighbor. Goes back a couple of parshiot to Kiddushim. Women's lives are being controlled here by people who have no business controlling their lives, and Jews are being prohibited from practicing their religion in the state of Alabama. And so that's why it was important to me today, in addition to giving you the information for Jew-curious people, learning about Judaism and what it says about a lot of things, including some of the most critical things in human decision-making. So I wanted to give you the information, but I also wanted to make it very clear what I think is at stake and anecdotally where I stand on it. So that's what I wanted to get across to you today. I want to jump into the chat to see what questions people have about this. We've got a larger than normal crowd today. We got a double minion here. So let's see what's going on. Buddy is asking, interested to know not only the active but also the passive, not only if one undergoes the process, but if one helps or ignores what is taking place. And I'll say this is one of the things that's most, so I'll keep it a little bit more sterile for right now, or just a little bit more. So I'll answer your direct question, then I'll tell you kind of where it hits me personally, if that's okay with you. The thing is, there's nothing about that says if it's a passive process, something like I remember hearing this many years ago, but some very high percentages of conceived pregnancies end in miscarriage, and many of them happen before anybody even knows that a person is pregnant. It's like at the very inception. So the idea of like life beginning at conception, and anything that contravenes that is a sin somehow, is ridiculous to me, because a body will spontaneously reject a conceived embryo, either for the health of the embryo or for the health of the person bearing it, because sometimes genetic abnormalities happen early on, and the body in its own intricate chemistry decides that this is not a viable pregnancy, and so a miscarriage occurs. And sometimes this happens so early on in the process that it's not even noticed that the person was pregnant. Sometimes it happens well into the pregnancy when the person very much notices that she was pregnant, and so. But it's a process that's natural to the body. No intervention has taken place. It happens. And when it happens, it's hard. And I say that, not that it's happened to me. I don't have the equipment for that. But it's happened in my family. It's happened in my family a couple of times. And it's happened in the families of good friends of mine. And I know how hard that is for people. And so, sorry, I'm going to take a little coffee to ruin my emotions. And so the idea, and I don't know if this is actually in the language of the bill or just people getting excited about it, but there is this idea that life begins when a person knows she's pregnant. Or that's the assertion that's being made here, is that once there's a heartbeat, or once life is detected, once the mother is aware that she's pregnant, then that's when the fetus has standing, let's say. The fetus has a legal status as a human being. And that if a woman were to miscarry, she might be subject to an investigation as to whether she was intentionally responsible for that. And the very notion that someone could go to their doctor having suffered a miscarriage, and there is suffering involved, and have that doctor or anybody else say, did you do this on purpose? We have to check a box on a form, right? Or we have to investigate, God forbid, is anathema, is disgusting to me. So that's another thing about this that kind of riles me up personally. Sorry to get too personal there. I should be kind of a dispassionate teacher on this subject, but I can't be. So forget about it. My friends will forgive me. So, but it's like, if it's a passive thing, then there's no consideration or judgment that anyone is at fault. It's It's if this was a desired or healthy pregnancy to have, then it's a tragic event, right? The case that's quoted in Exodus is clearly an accident, right? It's clearly that they set the scene up like two dudes, or it's not a man fighting with a woman, it's two dudes are fighting, and a man injures a woman by accident, not even a party to what's going on there, and then that woman miscarries. She's not at fault, right? And the person who initiated that intervention is only at fault because clearly she didn't want this to happen, right? So this is like a case of an accident. This is like somebody falling off a bicycle or something. Like they didn't intend for that to happen. The body didn't do it by itself, but they didn't intend for that to happen. And so clearly, the only person who's at fault is the person who initiated that without consent. But the but if one undergoes a process, again, this goes into the category of a medical procedure to save a life, according to the strictest interpretation, or to save health, including mental health. If it's a natural process, that nobody is at fault. If it's an unwanted, unnatural process, then the person who did it is committed violence, did damages, and is liable for that. But if somebody's undergoing a process, and there are texts out there that say like if it's I hate to say this, whimsical, if it's in the sense of somebody just doesn't want to have a baby, or if it's for purely economic circumstances, and I have some doubts about that, because there are some chuvot, some rabbinic writings of the late 20th century that say, a person going to have an abortion purely because they're worried about their finances or their economic situation should not be permitted to have an abortion. I want to put some asterisks on that personally, because I know that kind of financial difficulty, not being able to feed your kids, can have traumatic consequences on the entire family and on the mental health of everybody involved. And sometimes, because of economic circumstances, even the physical health. What if you can't afford good food? What if you can't afford to raise your children in a nourishing way? That impacts their health, as we see in impoverished communities throughout the world. So I hope that clarifies things for you, bud. Let's see. Greisicle's got a great quote of Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg here. You can follow her. You can see it in the chat. It's hashtag the radar, or the radar, THERADR on Twitter. And Greisicle's quoting her: Jewish tradition cherishes the sanctity of life, including the potential life which a pregnant woman carries within her, but does not believe personhood and human rights begin with conception, but rather with birth, as indicated by Exodus 21, verse 22 and 23. So that's a quote from Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. I highly encourage you to check out her writings on Twitter and elsewhere. She writes an incredible book about the Jewish spirituality of parenthood, and you can find that on her Twitter profile as well. So just taking a look at what other questions we have in the chat. Susan shares, I like your First Amendment argument on this topic. Again, I just want to caveat this. I am not a constitutional lawyer. I'm just an American who has read the Constitution at least once, and the First Amendment quite a bit. But she says, Susan says, I like your First Amendment argument on this topic. I hope those who ultimately litigate this issue include that point in their challenge to these ridiculous laws. I'm not the first one to notice this, I'll just say. Rabbis around the world have noticed this at this point, and I'm sure other legal scholars as well. So I don't think that this will be ignored when it comes to play. I don't want to, what I want to be really clear about is not ranking the severity of the different aspects of this. I'm not saying this is a First Amendment travesty first and a women's health travesty second, or vice versa. I think these are both unique events of violence done to American people. First, abridging the rights of women to determine their health care, and separately, abridging the rights of Jews to freely exercise their religion. Both things are at play. Either one would be, as the lawyers say, dispositive for me. Either one of these things is unconscionable, just in my opinion. But both of them put together, especially, I think we need to pay attention. Buddy from Georgia very generously shares that he says, "My wife and I had had many miscarriages before we had three miracle babies, all perfectly signed, all perfectly timed, and we see the providence." And Ruthie is sharing, "Sorry you and your wife had to go through that, buddy." I really do appreciate how supportive this community is with each other. That's what I'm most proud of in all of our learning together. But I want to say, yes, it happens. And some people see the hand of providence in this with a capital P, meaning God. And some people don't cotton to that, but it also has to do with the wisdom of the human body. Our human bodies are designed to be self-healing and self-maintaining. Sometimes that breaks down and we need to intervene. But my understanding, having gone through this and having read up on it, because that's what I do when I'm dealing with something serious, is I read a lot of books and articles and things, is that a lot of pregnancies are spontaneously aborted in early stages and sometimes not so early stages, because it's clear it's clear among the mechanisms involved that the fetus is not viable, and that's why a miscarriage occurs spontaneously. So whether you are more compelled by the biological wisdom of this or the hand of providence in this, either way, it's not. Either way, you can destigmatize miscarriage. It doesn't take the pain out of it, but it's not any person's fault, and I want to make that clear as well. Val is sharing that even the most orthodox would not ban a woman from having an abortion in a nutshell, and so that's also what's clear in the reporting that I've seen from women in Orthodox communities, women in Haredi communities, that people would consult their rabbi if they needed an abortion and things like that. And what's common in those communities is, the party line is don't get an abortion, don't get an abortion, don't get an abortion. And the rabbis who are lenient on circumstances in which a woman would get an abortion, the women know who those rabbis are in those communities, and they will hand out their phone number. And so even in the communities where abortion is most vociferously discouraged, women are encouraged to consult with sympathetic rabbis who will guide them through the spiritual aspect of the process. And I think that's shows a lot of chesed, or kindness and loving kindness in those communities. And Miriam shares, "Thanks, Val. That's nice to hear. The Orthodox aren't as controlling as people say." No comment on that. I hope I get that across as well. I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. Probably is pretty obvious by now. But I never want to make any vast, what's the word, stereotypes about a particular denomination or anything like that. Assume that somebody loves their children and fellow human less than I do. So I've actually found a lot of chesed in my association with people in the Orthodox community. So I'm glad that that's being called out here. Dennis is asking, Dennis Demenis, like it's written like Demenis, like DiMaggio, but Dennis Demenis, I don't know if that's your real name, says, if a pregnant woman is sentenced to death, can the execution go forward if she has not gone into labor? And so I'm not going to answer this from a civil legal point of view because it varies by state, and I'm not familiar with all of those statutes. And I'm also not going to answer this necessarily from a Jewish point of view, yes or no, just to say that it wouldn't happen because rabbinic Jews have largely figured out a way to never execute people. That goes back to the time of the Sanhedrin in classical times, over 2,000 years ago. Just about anything that's liable for the death penalty, we've found a way to raise standards of evidence so that the death penalty doesn't happen because it is also anathema, I think. So, I mean, I can't speak for biblical era religious authorities, only to say that even there, it probably wouldn't happen. I don't think people would take executing a pregnant person lightly. And so, but there are no cases of it in the Torah that I'm familiar with. All right, everybody. I really appreciate people showing up and sticking around for what is, and I'll say has been for me, a hard thing to talk about, as was clear earlier, but an important thing to talk about nevertheless, and really sharing your stories, sharing your sincere questions, and listening to me talk for a little while. My goal today was to inform people on how abortion is viewed in Scripture and in interpretations of Scripture and in legal rulings subsequent to that. Just to be clear, that abortion is always frowned upon in in Jewish circles. It's never something that's to be taken lightly or encouraged, but it is never ever categorically forbidden to anyone, just in case there might be a circumstance where it is necessary in order to save the life, and some would say the health, including the mental health of the mother. That's point number one I wanted to make today. Point number two is that is that legislation that has recently been passed in Alabama and is being considered in other states as well, abrogates the free exercise of religion of Jewish people in those states, whether it is people who are pregnant or people who are healthcare providers. They are not allowed to practice their religion in those states if and when these laws are passed. And I think that's serious. And I encourage people to learn up on this topic. If you are inspired to do something about this, there are organizations, there are people, there's a lot of folks just jumping on the ramparts about this. A great source of information, both Jewish information, but also organizational information, can come from Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. I'm shouting her out. I didn't ask her permission to quote her in this thing, but she's a public figure, so I'll say I think she's the one that's doing some of the best work on this and knows the other people who are doing the best work on this. So look for Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg in Twitter primarily. And if you want to get to know her better, I had her on the Jew Curious Show podcast a little while back. So look for that episode and learn from her, get to know her, and continue to learn from her. It's really been, I'll say, my honor, if not pleasure, to talk about this topic today. I really appreciate the live studio audience for joining me and weighing in. Most of all, I appreciate you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show podcast. If you'd like to get to know some of these other people who've joined us today for the live studio show, I highly recommend that you go to jewcurious.show/JCC, which stands for Jew Curious Community Center. This is a private, lovingly tended, carefully guarded, troll-free Facebook community for Jew Curious people just like you. And with that, I'm going to say to everybody who's listening live, Shabbat Shalom. And if you're listening to this later, also Shabbat Shalom. You should always have a good Shabbat. That's always a good thing to have. In any case, it's been my honor to learn with you today. And until next time, Hero, peace. All right, everybody, that's it for today's discussion and podcast recording anyway. Really appreciate your being here. For regular viewers, I want to give you the inside dope. So I'm going to be offline off of YouTube for a few days now. I won't be on tomorrow because it's Shabbat. I won't be on Sunday because I'm traveling for my son's wedding. My oldest son is getting married, and so I'm going out of town for that, and I might not be back on Tuesday either. So watch this, guys. Latest I'll be back on YouTube is on Wednesday of next week, but it might not be until Wednesday. So the best thing to do, if you're actually signed up for that Jew Curious Community Center, you're on my email list, which means you'll be notified in advance of the next live session. Another great thing to do, I got a message from somebody today says, I never know when you're live because I have been changing the schedule up a little bit lately. But the best thing to do is be in the Jew Curious Community Center. That means you're on my email list and you'll know about things, or you can check out the YouTube channel. Just check it out every few days. I have all the scheduled live things posted in advance so you can see when they're going to be, what topics we're going to be talking about, and whether you want to join us. I'll also say if you have enjoyed this discussion or gotten something out of it today, give us a thumbs up. There's a little, like, click the little thumb on there. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please do, and you just get notified when stuff happens. And once again, as always, it's my pleasure learning with this thoughtful community who are kind to each other and and very kind to me, I'll say. So thank you for that. And until next time, heroes, peace and Shabbat Shalom.